Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how to drain the transmission fluid and replace the transmission filter in my 2001 Isuzu Rodeo. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and drain the fluid from the drain pan. To do that, we will need a 19mm socket and wrench and a catch basin to catch all the old fluid. So let me get my tools in position and get underneath the vehicle, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'll be right back. Alright, we are positioned under the vehicle now, and you can see here is the main transmission drain pan. There's also a smaller second pan in front of it. I'm planning to drop both pans to drain as much fluid as I possibly can. The filter is housed inside this pan, but this pan holds another quart or two of fluid, so I'm going to go ahead and remove it just so I can change as much of the fluid out as I can. Simply draining the fluid is not going to remove all of it from the system, because there's some in the torque converter and the transmission cooler lines that you're not going to get out. But you can get probably 3/4 of it out of the way this way. So to begin, we need to go ahead and drain the fluid from the main pan. You'll see the main pan has two 19mm bolts. You'll see one here, that's the drain plug, and the one up on the top section of the pan is the fill plug. So to drain, we want to remove the drain plug. That requires a 19mm socket. And I've got a catch basin below. It's going to catch all the fluid running out, so I'm going to remove that, let it all drain until it's just a trickle. I'll put the plug back in. The other plug, the fill plug, is what we will remove to add fluid back to the system after we've replaced the filter and reinstalled the pan. There's no dipstick on this transmission, unfortunately, so you can't add fluid from the engine compartment. You actually have to do it from under the vehicle, which gets a little tricky since you're fighting against gravity to pump it up into the pan. But we'll get to that later. So without further ado, let me remove the drain plug and we will move along once the fluid drains out. Okay, I finished draining the fluid. I'm guessing I got maybe 6 or 7 quarts out. Maybe a little bit less, maybe about 5. I didn't measure it, but anyhow, I went ahead and put the drain plug back in so the fluid stopped dripping all over me while I'm under here working. You don't have to torque it in tight for now if you don't want to. We just need to make sure it's tight later before we fill everything back up. So now that we have removed most of the fluid, we need to move on to the next step, which unfortunately is going to be removing the transmission crossmember right here so we can access the pan. Let me reposition and I'll be right back. Alright, so as I mentioned, before we can remove the drain pan to change the filter, unfortunately we're going to have to remove the transmission crossmember, which spans from driver's side to passenger side and actually attaches to the bottom of the transmission and helps support it. The reason we got to do this is it blocks some of the pan bolts. You can kind of see up in there. There's not really a good way to get a socket up in there to remove the pan with that lip on the crossmember in the way. I don't understand why they designed it this way. It looks like they could have clearanced that crossmember or notched or something so you could get your socket up past it, but nevertheless they didn't, so we're gonna have to remove it. So my plan of attack is, well, first and foremost, I've supported the bottom of the transfer case with a jack. You don't have to crank up on it hard, but when you take the crossmember down, obviously the transmission is no longer supported. So the transfer case bolts to the back side of the transmission, so if we support that, things shouldn't sag too bad when we take the crossmember off. So my plan of attack is probably take the outer bolts off on the crossmember and then get to the center bolts first. I'll show you the other side here in a second, but we've got 3 17mm bolts on this side. 1, 2, free. We've got the same on the other side, with some additional smaller nuts over there for some brackets, and then there's two 17mm nuts that go in the center up in those two holes that bolt to a bracket on the bottom of the transmission. So you can see I've already loosened these on this end. The cross members drop down a little bit. I'm going to move to the other side and show you what's over there. Alright, so I'm under the passenger side now, getting ready to remove the cross member, and just wanted to show the connections on this side. So we've got three 17mm bolts, just like on the other side. 1, 2, 3. And we've also got some smaller 10mm nuts that attach to some studs that are mounted to some brackets that go up above the cross member, and I believe that's for I think those are the transmission fluid supply and return lines to the cooler, the transmission cooler, that kind of fit up inside the cross member, and they're attached to some brackets. So we've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, and 4 10mm nuts that we've got to remove. So I'm going to start by removing those. You can see I've already kind of loosened them. And then we've also got two 17mm nuts in the center that bolt to the mounting bracket on the transmission itself. So I think my plan of attack is going to be remove the 10mm nuts first, then remove the 17mm bolts from each side, and then position myself underneath here and try to carefully take those two center nuts off with my impact driver while I'm holding the cross member up with the other hand, and then it's just going to drop down. If you have an extra person to help you, or two, it'd be great if you had one person to hold each end while you undo everything, so you don't drop this on yourself. It's probably pretty heavy, so just be very careful. I'm not really going to be able to film this process, but these are all the connections we need to remove, so I'm going to just get it out of the way, and we'll move along with getting the drain pan off. Okay, now that we have the cross member removed, we need to remove this cross member mounting bracket, because it doesn't look like we can get a socket up in here to get to the main pan bolts right here. Just a really inconvenient design, but we've come this far. What's one more piece to take off? This has two 14mm bolts, one there, and hopefully you can see that one on that side. So let me break those loose and we will move along. Alright, so now that we've got the cross member mounting bracket removed, it finally gives us access to all of the main drain pan bolts. So the main pan has 16 10mm bolts that go all the way around the perimeter. And why they designed the vehicle so that you had to remove the cross member and bracket, I have no idea. It seems like they could have just maybe notched the cross member so you could access these bolts, but regardless, this is going to make it easier to clean the mounting or the mating surface on the bottom of the transmission. So in my case, I'm planning to remove both drain pans, the small one up front as well as the main pan in the back. And I think it's actually going to be easier if I take the smaller pan off first. So I'm going to do that. And it's going to have a bunch of fluid in it because there's no drain plug on it, so it's going to be messy. I'm just going to remove, all but 3 or 4 bolts first, and then drop it and just make sure you have a catch basin underneath to do that. And then we'll move on to getting the main pan off. So sit tight and we'll move along. Alright, so now that I've got the auxiliary pan removed, I'm going to go ahead and remove the main drain pan. Again, if you're not going to take the auxiliary pan off, then you can go straight to the step. I went ahead and took it off so I could get as much fluid out as I could. And if you're going to take both of them off, I would recommend doing the smaller pan first, just because I think it gives you better access to the bolts on the main pan. You can see how close together they are. I just felt like it was easier to take that pan, the smaller pan, off first. So anyhow, there's going to be 16 10mm bolts around the perimeter of the main pan. You can see a bunch of them. There you go. You see them all the way around. So just loosen those. I'm going to go ahead and take out all but 3 or 4, and then I'll loosen those last 3 or 4, and kind of get them almost all the way out, and then I'll position myself and get ready to catch the pan as it comes off. I'll try to give a shot of that next. Okay, I've got all but 4 of the bolts out of the main pan now. You can see that it's loose, and I'm ready to pull it down. I did have to take a pry bar and kind of put it on the mating surface between the pan and the bottom of the transmission, and kind of give it a couple good whacks with a hammer. You don't want to go beating on that edge too hard, but I had an old paper gasket and it was stuck really hard. I could not budge the pan without putting a pry bar up in here and giving a couple of blows with the end of on the end with a hammer, and that loosened it up. So just keep in mind now that even though we've drained most of the fluid, there's still going to be some in there. So when you drop the pan, you want to have a catch basin or something handy underneath it. And there's really not a good way to do this, but I would recommend getting, like I've got it, with 3 or 4 bolts holding it loose, and just try to crawl up under there and hold it up with one hand while you take out the remaining few bolts. And it's probably going to get a little messy, but just be prepared to have some fluid splash out on you when you drop the pan down. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get this removed and work on cleaning it out and replacing the filter. Alright, so I've got the pan out from under the vehicle. I've already kind of cleaned it out, still got a little bit of fluid in there, but you'll see there's a magnet here that's detachable, and it sits on a little raised portion of the pan to kind of lock it in place. You'll see some gunk that's going to be on your magnet more than likely, and that's material, clutch material that's, from wear of driving the vehicle. If you see chunks and big shards of metal, that's a bad sign. A little bit of film and build up on the magnet is pretty normal, I think, but if you see big chunks of metal, that's the sign of something a little bit more severe, and you might be either on the verge of transmission failure or already in the process of your transmission starting to fail. So you may want to have it checked out if that's what you find in the pan. So we just need to get this cleaned up. We need to clean up this mating surface. I had a paper gasket, so I've got some residue left here to clean off. You don't want to gouge the surface with anything sharp, but if you've got something flat that's not super sharp metal, you can kind of use that to ease the old gasket material off. Just take your time, get it nice and clean so that you don't have any leaks later. Alright, so I'm going to finish drying this out, clean it up, and then we'll proceed to putting the new filter in and putting the pan back on. Alright, so now you can see the transmission filter. To remove it, we just need to take out the 3 13mm bolts that hold it in place. You can see 2 here, one's on the back side. So we're going to go ahead and remove these, and the filter will just drop straight down. So let me get this pulled out, and then we will work on putting the new filter in. Alright, we've got the old filter off now, and we are ready to reinstall the new filter, and then clean up the pan mating surface, and then we can reinstall the pans. and move on to refilling the transmission. So I'm going to get the filter in place, and we'll reinstall that with three 13mm bolts.